The smell of roasted chicken and thyme lingered in my kitchen, wrapping itself around the Sunday quiet, the way a blanket tucks over tired shoulders. I set the last plate on the table and sat down, knees aching from the climb up and down the basement stairs. Celine and Adrian arrived late, as usual, breezing in with apologies that sounded more rehearsed than sincere. Lyra trailed behind them, shoulders hunched, earbuds dangling around her neck. We ate, as we always did, forks clinking against plates. Small talk draped over the silence like lace covering broken wood. I asked Lyra about school, and she smiled shyly, offering answers that felt too short for her intelligence. Celine cut me off mid-sentence. "Mom, we need to talk about something important." She put her fork down, eyes darting toward Adrian before locking on me. "The rent went up again, and Adrian's hours got cut. We just need a little help to get through this month." Her voice carried that familiar mix of desperation and entitlement I had learned to recognize long ago. Adrian nodded solemnly, though his tie was loosened with the kind of ease that didn't look like a man worried about money. I took a sip of water, steadying myself. "Celine, I've already helped you twice this year. You and Adrian need to manage on your own now. You're both capable." Her jaw tightened, painted smile straining. "You'd let your daughter and granddaughter go," without Lyra's eyes flicked toward me, wide with unspoken words. I saw the tremor in her hand as she pushed peas across her plate. "I know you'll find a way," I said gently, folding my napkin. "I can't be the solution every time." The rest of the meal dissolved into half-hearted conversation. When they finally left, Adrian carrying the leftovers as though he were owed them, I stood at the window until their car disappeared down the street. That night, I went to my bedroom to put away the cash I'd set aside for groceries. I opened the drawer, reached for my wallet, and stopped. The envelope where I kept smaller bills felt thinner, lighter. I counted, $50 short. I closed the drawer quietly, the hum of the furnace filling the silence around me. My hands rested on the wood a moment longer, steady though my chest was not. The next morning, I rose early and turned to the ledger I'd kept since Rowan passed, tracing numbers that told the story of every sacrifice. The ledger lay open on my desk, its pages worn soft from years of handling. I pressed the cap of my pen to the paper, not writing, just holding it there, as if the ink itself might testify to everything I'd given away. The numbers told their own story. 12,000 for the wedding Celine swore would be modest. I had sold Rowan's coin collection for that, a collection he'd polished every Sunday afternoon while humming old jazz records. 15,000 for the boutique she insisted would be her future. I had dipped into my retirement for that, trading security for her dream of independence that closed within 18 months. 7,000 for medical bills. Months later, when stress left her bedridden and Adrian pacing hospital corridors as if worry alone were currency, all of it added, subtracted, carried forward, until the figure at the bottom stared back at me $62,000 in 10 years. A lifetime of Rowan's overtime shifts, my careful bookkeeping, and every penny I saved instead of traveling or repainting the house. I shut my eyes and heard Rowan's voice again, the rasp that had grown thin near the end. "Don't let our daughter mistake your love for weakness. Iris, promise me that." I had promised, and then broken it with every check I signed. My knees ached as I stood and crossed to the window. Outside, frost still clung to the edges of the lawn, sparkling as if the world could disguise its hardness under a sheen of beauty. My reflection in the glass looked older than yesterday, a woman carrying too many ledgers of sacrifice. I closed the book, slid it back into the drawer, and promised myself it would not open again so easily. The following Friday, I had just settled into my armchair with a cup of tea when the front door burst open. Celine swept in, her heels striking the floor like a drum roll. Adrian close behind her, with a smirk already painted on his face. She held up a chilled bottle of champagne, the cork still wrapped in foil. "Mom, celebrate with us," she announced breathlessly. "I got promoted senior accounts director. Can you believe it? Double the salary, full benefits. We're finally set." Adrian draped an arm over her shoulder and added, "We'll be taking care of things now. Iris? No more leaning on you." His tone carried the sort of smugness that comes from a man who hadn't earned stability, but wanted credit for it anyway. I tried to smile, though something tugged at me. As Celine reached for the glasses in my cabinet, the sleeve of her blouse shifted just enough for me to see it. A silver watch with a delicate mother-of-pearl face. My heart dropped. That watch had been Rowan's gift to me on our 30th anniversary. It had gone missing from my dresser last year. After one of Celine's visits, I had convinced myself I'd misplaced it. Now it gleamed on her wrist as if it had always belonged there. Lyra lingered near the kitchen doorway, her eyes fixed on her mother, but her expression uneasy. When I joined her in the kitchen, she tugged gently at my sleeve. "Grandma," she whispered, voice low enough that only I could hear. "Don't trust them tonight." Her warning settled over me heavier than the steam rising from my untouched teacup. I stepped back into the living room, the champagne cork about to pop, my eyes on the watch that marked more than just time. By Saturday evening, the backyard smelled of lighter fluid and charcoal. I had agreed to host a barbecue, though the invitation had felt more like a demand from Celine than my own idea. Adrian busied himself at the patio table, uncorking a second bottle of wine with the swagger of a man who thought pouring drinks was equal to providing for a family. "Relax tonight, Iris," he said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Celine's promotion means smoother sailing from here on out." I nodded, offering a thin smile, though my gaze drifted often toward the back door. Celine had slipped inside under the pretense of grabbing condiments. The minutes stretched. When I finally moved toward the kitchen, I stopped just short of the doorway. Through the narrow crack of light, I saw her crouched near the coat rack where my canvas backpack rested. Her movements were sharp, almost surgical. She withdrew a small bundle wrapped in dark tissue paper from her purse and slid it deep into the outer pocket of my bag. Her eyes flicked around the room before she smoothed her blouse, collected a jar of mustard, and returned to the patio as if nothing had happened. My heart thudded against my ribs. I steadied my hands on the counter and forced myself to breathe evenly. No accusations. Not yet. Not until I understood. Later, while Adrian bragged about connections over sizzling steaks, I excused myself. I carried the backpack upstairs with deliberate calm, each step heavier than the last. In the quiet of my bedroom, I unzipped the pocket. My fingers brushed tissue paper, rigid beneath the layers, but I did not unwrap it. Instead, I crossed to the guest room where Celine often stayed. I opened her lingerie drawer, slid the bundle beneath a pile of silk scarves, and closed it with the same care I'd give to a ticking clock. My pulse echoed in my ears as I rehearsed what to say if she noticed. Whatever Celine had planted in my bag, it was no longer mine to carry. It was half an hour later when the night split open with flashing red and blue. Tires crunched against my gravel drive, and the sudden glare of headlights poured across the lawn. Neighbors drifted out onto porches, arms folded in robes and jackets, murmurs passing from one house to another like a current. 3 patrol cars lined my driveway. From the first stepped a woman with clipped authority in her stride, Detective Medina. She introduced herself, badge raised briefly. We received a tip about stolen property traced to this address. Celine's gasp was perfectly measured, hand flying to her chest in rehearsed shock. Stolen property. That can't be possible. She clutched Adrian's sleeve, then turned toward the officers with watery eyes. You should check my mother's backpack. She's been forgetful lately, sometimes confused. Her voice cracked on the last word, a performance so polished it drew sympathetic glances from a few neighbors peering over the hedge. My cheeks burned with heat that had nothing to do with the grill. Inside, Detective Medina gestured toward the dining table. May we? I stepped aside, every muscle taut, as two officers placed my canvas backpack squarely in the center. The zipper's hum sounded loud enough to rattle the windows. My heart pounded against my ribs as they sifted through notebooks, gloves, receipts. The ordinary debris of my life. Finally, the officer straightened. Nothing here. Detective. A silence heavier than stone filled the room. Celine blinked rapidly. Lips parted as though she had forgotten her next line. Adrian's jaw tightened. I folded my arms across my chest, keeping my breathing steady, though relief surged through me like a tide. Lyra stood frozen near the kitchen doorway, her gaze darting between her mother and me, the truth pressing against her lips, though she said nothing. Detective Medina's eyes narrowed slightly as she studied the room, then glanced upstairs. The sound of her footsteps on the stairwell cut through the air, each one carrying her closer to the drawer I had touched not long before. Detective Medina paused at the foot of the stairs, and I heard myself speak before doubt could catch me. Perhaps check every room. I saw my daughter upstairs earlier. My voice was steady, measured, though my pulse hammered. Medina's eyes flicked to Celine, then back to me. We'll take a look. Two officers followed her up, their boots sounding deliberate against the wood. Celine's face drained of color. "Mom," she hissed, gripping the back of a chair. "What are you doing?" I didn't answer. Lyra stood rooted in the corner, tears already brimming, her small frame trembling. From upstairs came the unmistakable scrape of a drawer opening, then another. Silence. And then a low voice. "Detective, you should see this." They returned carrying a tissue-wrapped bundle. Medina unfolded it carefully on the dining table. A platinum ring sparkled beneath the overhead light, its stone throwing fractured rainbows across the wood. Beside it lay a small black USB stick. Adrian jumped forward, hands raised in protest. "That's planted evidence someone's framing us. You can't take this seriously." His tone was too quick, too rehearsed, the desperation leaking through the cracks. Lyra suddenly broke. "No, I saw her," she cried, pointing at her mother. "I saw Mom by Grandma's bag earlier. She put something in it." The words tumbled out between sobs, the truth clawing its way free. The room froze. Celine's mouth opened and closed like she had forgotten how to breathe. Finally, she turned her pleading eyes toward me. "Mom, how could you? How could you do this to me?" Her accusation twisted the air, heavy with irony. My hands rested flat on the table, steadying me against the storm she had unleashed. Medina's gaze swept across the scene, Adrian's sputtering protests, Lyra's tear-streaked cheeks, Celine's frantic performance, and then settled on the ring glinting coldly in the center of it all. The truth, once hidden in scarves, now lay naked on my table. And as the officers began to collect evidence, I felt the deeper weight of realization pressing down. This wasn't about one stolen jewel. It was the shadow of something darker, waiting to be uncovered. The station smelled of burnt coffee and disinfectant, a mix that clung to the air as if it had seeped into the walls. I sat across from Detective Medina, my palms pressed flat against the cool metal of the table. The bundle ring and USB rested in an evidence bag between us. She leaned forward, her voice low but firm. "The stick contains internal camera layouts of Diamond Haven, a jewelry store that was robbed yesterday afternoon. The platinum ring is listed in their missing inventory." The words struck harder than any raised fist could. My daughter hadn't just lied or borrowed without asking. She had tethered me to a crime that could have caged me for years. Medina slid the evidence bag aside and folded her hands. You seem prepared for this. Mrs. Bale, anything you want to add? I reached into my apron. The same one I had been wearing when I caught Celine by the coat rack. My fingers brushed the phone tucked in the pocket, its screen already cued to the recording I had started earlier in the evening. With a steady breath, I pressed play. Celine's voice emerged first, hushed and sharp. Once Mom's booked. The house is ours. Adrian's laugh followed, low and satisfied. The sound filled the small room like poison escaping a vial. Medina's eyes flicked toward the speaker, then back to me, unreadable but sharper than before. She stopped the recording and nodded once. That will help. I sat back, the chair hard beneath me, and let the betrayal wash over me. I thought of the sacrifices etched in my ledgers the vintage Harley Rowan had restored. Sold so Celine could chase her dream of a boutique that failed before the paint on its walls dried. The late nights I had worked extra shifts, the vacations never taken, the retirement chipped away piece by piece. Now, all of it, the sacrifices, the patience, the love had been twisted into a motive for my erasure. Medina stood, gathering the files. We'll pursue charges. As she left me with my thoughts, I could only wonder what papers already bore my forged name, waiting like landmines in the dark. May arrived the next morning with her usual brisk knock and a basket of scones she'd baked to keep our hands busy. We sat at my kitchen table, sunlight spilling over the scattered piles of unopened mail I had been avoiding for months. My eyes had grown tired of envelopes stamped urgent and final notice. And yet, May insisted we sift through them one by one. It was she who noticed the first irregularity. A loan statement addressed to me from a bank I had never visited. The numbers made my stomach clench. $15,000. Outstanding balance. Interest already gnawing at the edges. My hands shook as I flipped through the next envelope, then another, each confirming the same account. Each signed with my name in handwriting that almost passed for mine. Almost. May pressed her palm over mine, steadying me. This isn't your doing. Iris, she forged you. The word forged cut deeper than the sight of the debt itself. My daughter had stolen not just money, but my very identity. The apron recording had been damning enough, but these papers were quieter proof. Steady and undeniable. Together, they painted a picture of a betrayal so deliberate it left no space for excuses. I stacked the documents neatly, each one a nail sealing the coffin of denial I had carried for too long. That afternoon, I filed no trespass orders at the courthouse. My voice calm, though my heart trembled. Celine and Adrian would no longer step foot on my porch, not as daughter and son-in-law, not as supplicants. And yet, as I signed the final paper, I thought of Lyra, her frightened eyes, her whispered warning. That evening, I transferred what savings I could spare into a new account, marked only with her name. A college fund. Small, but hers alone. The evidence would protect me. The fund might protect her. But neither could touch the hollow ache in my chest as I prepared for the trial that would follow. The courtroom smelled faintly of varnish and old paper, the kind of place where time itself seemed to linger. I sat in the front row, hands folded neatly in my lap, while the bailiff led Celine and Adrian to the defense table. She looked smaller than I remembered, her wrists swallowed by the cuffs, her eyes darting anywhere but toward me. Adrian, by contrast, carried himself with the bravado of a man who still thought charm could bend truth. The prosecutor wasted no time. First came the recording, my phone's speaker releasing Celine's whisper. Once Mom's booked. The house is ours. Gasps rippled through the gallery, and Celine's shoulders curled inward as though she could shrink from the sound. Adrian's jaw twitched. but he sat stone-faced. Then the bank officers testified, presenting copies of the forged loan documents. Each page bore my name in handwriting the experts confirmed was false. Their voices were clinical, detached, but the weight of their words pressed heavily across the room. The judge's verdict arrived with the finality of a closing ledger. Adrian was sentenced to prison for robbery and conspiracy. Celine's punishment was softer probation, restitution, and mandatory community service assigned, in bitter irony, to the very financial literacy program I taught at the library. During recess, I walked past her where she sat slumped on the bench, her hands trembling without the cuffs. I leaned close enough that only she could hear me. "I will always be your mother," I whispered, the words roughened by the ache in my chest. "But I will never be your alibi again." Her eyes filled, but she said nothing. I turned away, the echo of my steps carrying me toward the corridor where sunlight spilled through tall windows, leading me to whatever came next. Spring came quietly, as if the earth itself understood I needed gentleness. The air carried the soft hum of bees and the smell of lilacs from May's yard next door. My own windowsill, once cluttered with unopened mail and worry, now bloomed with small clay pots where Lyra and I had planted rose cuttings. She handled them with care, her hands steady despite all she had endured. "Grandma, this one's already rooting," she said, brushing soil from her fingers. Her eyes lit in a way that reminded me of Rowan, the same mixture of focus and tenderness. I smiled, my chest warming with something steadier than relief. The house felt different, now quieter. Yes, but safe. No late-night phone calls begging for money, no sudden visits with hidden motives, just the creak of the old floors, the kettle's whistle, the rhythm of my own life settling back into itself. At the library, my classes filled with faces of young parents and older neighbors wanting to understand money better than they had before. I spoke not only of numbers but of choices, how every signature carries weight, how every unchecked favor can grow into chains. And then, one Thursday evening, Celine walked in. She took a seat at the back, her head lowered, hair tucked behind her ears like a schoolgirl who'd been caught. When class ended, she lingered, waiting until the room had emptied. With trembling fingers, she handed me an envelope. Inside was the first repayment receipt, stamped and official. "I'm trying," she whispered, eyes fixed on the floor. I nodded, tucking the paper into my binder without ceremony. No embrace, no words of forgiveness, just a beginning, fragile as a sprout pushing through soil. Later, back at home, I stood by the window with Lyra beside me. The roses stretched toward the light, leaves trembling in the breeze that slipped through the glass. I touched one bloom, its petals soft as breath, and let the truth settle in my bones. Love may open doors, but only respect keeps them open. And for the first time in years, I felt that my own door, the one within me, was finally safe to close at night.